He even, if we can, Jamie, when he is asked a question by an Israeli reporter when he was there with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he uses that opportunity again to, okay, I ask you about anti-Semitism. You respond by talking about how many electoral votes you won. Because it seems to me a disconnect.
We've seen a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incident across the United States. And I wonder, what do you say to those among the Jewish community in the States and in Israel and maybe around the world who believe and feel that your administration is playing with xenophobia and maybe racist tones?
Well, I just want to say that we are, very honored by the victory that we had, 306 electoral college votes. We were not supposed to crack 220. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an astounding dodge. And it was, ask a very specific question about anti-Semitism, and given an opportunity to condemn it, the president dodged. And that was the first of 3 times last week that he was given that opportunity by journalists. You were talking about early, the next day at his own press conference, a Jewish journalist from an Orthodox Jewish weekly asked him specifically about the rash of bomb threats that have been made against Jewish community centers. And as you mentioned earlier, he was cut off and then told that it was a very unfair question. And Trump just said that he's the least anti-Semitic person that he'd ever met, and just denied to answer the question.
And introduced his daughter and dropped it there again. Here is that exchange the day after the news conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
There's been a report out that 48 bomb threats have been made against Jewish centers all across the country in the last couple of weeks. There are people who are committing anti-Semitic acts or threatening to.
You see, he said he was going to ask a very simple, easy question. And it's not. It's not a simple question, not a fair question. Okay, sit down. I understand the rest of your question.
Yeah, basically, sit down and shut up. And that's when he says, I'm the least anti-Semitic person you've ever seen, boom, boom, boom. And not a fair question. Why isn't it a fair question?
Right. It seems like, what's nuts about that moment too is that that moment came after Trump said he was looking for a friendly reporter, and this reporter identified himself as such. It was a conservative outlet, and like he had basically aligned himself, at least for that moment, with Trump, and yet still Trump was willing to dismiss it as an unfair question. And then later on in that same press conference, another reporter tried to double down and said, hey, I want to second what my colleague said. We're not talking about you, Mr. President, your anti-Semitism. We're not accusing you of that. These reporters weren't. But we are talking about this rash of hate incidences against Jewish community centers. And then Trump pivoted and said that, oh no, those are put up by my enemies. Like, they can't possibly be done by people who support me. And so it's a constant deflection of any sort of responsibility on his part to kind of discuss anti-Semitism and the rise of it, both during his campaign for president and since he's been elected president.
All right, so let's back up. What have we seen in terms of anti-Semitism in this country?
So, just since he's been elected, we ThinkProgress started tracking hate incidences right after November 9th. And we found the largest group that has been affected, a marginalized group that has been affected by this, have been Jewish people. We've tracked 70 instances of anti-Semitism.
70?
70. Now, a lot of those are this rash of bomb threats. Until Monday, there were 48 bomb threats against Jewish community centers across the country in about 26 states. There was 11 more threats made on Monday. Some of those are against the same poor Jewish centers that are getting more than one call. But we're also seeing, synagogues that have had their windows smashed in and swastikas drawn on them. We've seen Jewish professors being given neo-Nazi propaganda, synagogues receiving neo-Nazi propaganda. And one of the other incidences that happened this week is a Jewish cemetery was desecrated, which is a tactic that's been happening in Europe for a little while. But we've seen this sharp rise, and that's just since Trump was elected. That's not actually including the other rise of anti-Semitism that we witnessed during his campaign, where you had Trump supporters leaving Trump rallies, telling people to go to Auschwitz. You had, Trump supporters shouting Nazi propaganda slogans during Trump rallies. Jewish reporters during that time period who wrote anything either even mildly critical of Trump and his family were hit with online harassment of, being sent death threats and horrible anti-Semitic imagery. We even got them at ThinkProgress. Some of our Jewish reporters got these, but so did the New York Times. It became this culture where anti-Semitism was, in many ways, normalized among Trump's supporters. It was something that was discussed, but Trump also refused to denounce it during that time period.